Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome to another episode of Cornerstone Quick Tips. In today's video, we are going to take a look at the differences between design templates, components without parameters, components with parameters, and then components with parameters that have been prefabbed. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to take a look at each one of those and see where and how each of those has a place in your design process and how they can function. So to get started, you'll see here we're in Cornerstone and we are on my home page. And we have a hero section here where we want to add 2 buttons. And you'll see I already have a row here with 2 columns in that row. So we want a button in column 1 and a button in column 2. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is the most simple of reusable design systems, which is a template. And by definition, templates are 100% disconnected from each other and are only used on an instance by instance basis. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's pretend that we have no design systems set up at all yet, and we just want to add 2 buttons in here. So we're going to type in a button. There's already a button element created by ThemeCo, so we're just going to grab that button and we're going to drag it right into column 1. Now, let's go ahead and duplicate that button into column 2. So we're going to call this one here button 1, and we'll call this one here button 2. And now we want to start styling this to fit our site's design. So just to, pick some colors here, we might want the button to be sort of this purplish color here. And then we want this button here to be more of an outline. So we might add a 1 pixel border. And then let's just pick that same purple. Obviously, we could be using global colors here, but we want something like this. We want the text to be black in this one, but in this one, we want the text to be white. So we'll just do something like this here. So now we just created some designs, right? We have a primary button and we have a secondary button. So now the next time we need a button on our site, let's say in this section down here, we come up here, we type in button, we drag this button out from ThemeCo, and it goes back to just being the vanilla button. And so we'd have to go back to finding the purple that we use, put that purple in here, make it all look good, restyle it, and that can take time. So this is where templates can come in handy. You can either right-click on this button and click Manage and scroll down to Save a Template, or you can also do the same exact thing by clicking on the button, coming up to Customize, going down to Presets here, where we then have Save Template. I'm going to click Save Template, and we'll call this Quick Tips Primary, and we'll save it. Now let's go into button 2. We'll go to Customize. We'll save a template. We'll call this one Quick Tips Secondary, and we'll save the button. Now, when we decide that later on in our design on this page or any future pages, we want to use one of those styled buttons, we can come up to our Elements tab here. We'll type in Quick, and we have Quick Tips Primary and Quick Tips Secondary. So I can grab our primary and put that one in here. And then if for some reason I wanted to, I could grab our secondary and pop that one in here. And that was nice, and that was easy, but they are not connected to each other in any way, shape, or form. So if I come into button 1 here, and I decide to change this color to red, just to be a little bit extreme here, and I come back into Customize, and I click Save Template, and I type in Quick Tips Dash Primary, and I save, it'll tell me it's going to override the current template. I'm going to click Yes, and so we just saved red as our new primary button color. And so now the next time I jump into my elements and I type in Quick Tips Primary and I drag that one out to our third card out here, it now starts off as red. But I changed that button color. Shouldn't this one change to red? And the answer is no, not when we're dealing with element or design templates. Because, again, as I mentioned, templates are completely disconnected from each other and are only used on an instance by instance basis. So it's a good baseline. You can almost look at these as prefab templates. So anything that you've entered into these controls here are prefabricated and are reused as a baseline for the next one, but then I could jump into this one here and I could make this one a green button and it doesn't affect this one or this one in the slightest. Now, it's worth noting as well that I'm using this on a single element, but you can also set up design templates. So this row of cards here, I might want to reuse in the future. And so I could click on the row, come up to Customize, go into our Save Template, and call this Cards Row Primary, save it. And now the next time I want to use that, I could come into our structure here. I could add a section. I could jump into that section and I could go primary, and here's our cards row primary. We'll click on that and it'll automatically add that in right here. But again, this is a template, so it's completely disconnected from our design styles here. If in the future we decide that there should be no buttons at all in the cards, this one is still going to have buttons. So templates are prefab templates on an instance by instance basis. But going back to our button concept, what if we are creating a design system and we want this to be more global? Well, we can do that as well. Let's click on this plus sign up here, and we're going to create a component document. Now, the component document is just a canvas that can house multiple components. So we're going to come in here, and we're just going to type design system. So this is our design system canvas that we're working within, and we'll just start from scratch. Now, we can have whatever containers we want here because we get to pick and choose what gets exported as a component. So now let's start with that vanilla button again that we were using before. But this time we're doing it inside of our design systems. We're going to click on this button and let's give it some sort of purple color here. So, you know, maybe something like this here looks pretty good. And then we'll give it some white text. So let's come down here and make the text white. And now we can export this as a component. And we need to give it a unique name to do that. You'll notice that if I come in here and I right click on this and I click on manage and I go to export component, it tells us we need to set a label before flagging this element as a component export. So we need something unique. So let's call this our 100% global button. And you'll see why I'm calling it that in a second. Now we could right click and click manage, and you'll notice we can export this as a component. We could also come into this cog here instead of right-clicking and do the same thing. So we're going to export this as a component, and we're not going to check any of the other boxes below the fold here. And now let's see how this functions. So we'll close out of this modal here. Let's save. Let's come back over to our home page here. And let's get rid of button 1. Now, inside of here, I want to add an element, and I want that element to be our 100% global button. So I'll add that in, and here it is. Now, this could work really well if you were doing reusable call to action sections, because remember, you could turn anything into a component. So this whole grid right here, we could put into our component library and create a cool little reusable section where we don't need to edit anything. You'll notice if I click on this 100% global button, I don't have any controls on it here, which isn't the most useful for a button, so this is only a Learn More button. If I want this to be a Click Here button, I could jump back over to our component design system, click on our 100% global button, change the text to Click Here, save it, and when I come back over to the home page or any other page on my site that utilizes this component, it is now changed to Click Here. But again, you can kind of see the problem there. If I have some buttons that are Learn More, some that are Click Here, some that are Read This, some that are Do That, I can't change that in a one-off basis. But where this does shine is if I decide in the future that that purple Click Here button now should be a red button, like we did with our template, and I save, and I jump back over to our home page here, you'll notice that that button, just like the text, has now updated in color across the board. So it's 100% global. But what if we want some things to be global and some things to be controlled on an instance by instance basis? Well, that's where parameters come in. So let's come over to our design systems canvas here, and we are going to create another component. This is going to be another button, but this one's going to include parameters for us to use on an instance by instance basis. So again, we're going to start with a vanilla button here. And then what we want to do is jump directly into this cog and click on Edit Parameters. Now we're creating additional surface level parameters that can be used on an instance by instance basis. Everything in the primary and the effects tab is going to take place on a global basis. So let's go ahead and create a few of these parameters here. Now I know this is going to seem complex, but we're essentially just creating custom fields on the component here. So we're going to start with some curly brackets to open up our parameters, and then we can begin defining those. And we're going to start with some simple stuff here. Let's go ahead and just create a button label. This is going to be the text inside of our button, so we'll call this button label. And you can kind of structure your names here however you want. We're going to do a colon, and then we'll open this up. The label for this, and you'll immediately notice we now have parameters here on the left-hand side. So let's open it up. Right now it just says button label, but we want a custom label. We're gonna say label, colon, maybe this is our call to action, so we'll call this CTA. And now you'll notice on the left that updated there. We're gonna add a comma, and now we wanna specify what type of parameter this is. So we're gonna type in type, and then we'll do colon, and this is just a text parameter, so it's gonna look largely the same as what's there. And then we're gonna add a comma, we're gonna say initial, so what's our initial text that we want in there? And maybe our initial text is, you'll notice the initial text with a vanilla button is learn more, so let's do something different. We'll say our initial text is click here, and now I think we're done there. But what else does a button need? This is where some planning comes in. A button is also going to likely need a custom destination. So we're gonna come down to our curly bracket here, add a comma. We'll do it again where we type in button URL, and then we do another curly bracket, label, we'll call this link, and add a comma. Type, well, you know what? This could actually be a text field as well. And then our initial here, maybe we just want this to have a hash in there initially, but then this could be changed in the future. And this is good. Let's start with those two. So now we do need to remember our button label and our button URL parameter names here. So now let's begin wiring this up. The first thing we need to do is jump into the primary tab of our button, and here we have our URL field. Let's erase what's there, come into the dynamic content, type in element parameters, and now we can specify the name for the URL, which was button URL. And we do need to use the casing that we used as well. So I had lowercase button, uppercase U, uppercase R, uppercase L. I'm going to click plus, and that's going to add in the URL dynamically from our instance parameters right here. Now I also want to do the same thing for our text. So I'm going to scroll down to where we have the learn more text, and I'm just going to paste in our button URL, which you can see updated to a hash there, and then I'm just going to change this to button label, and it should say click here. So now this is great. We can label this. Let's call this our button component plus parameters, and come up to our manage element and export this as a component. We will save. We'll jump out to our home page here, and let's go ahead and get rid of button 2 here. Let's click on column 2, click add element. We want our button component plus parameter. We'll add that in, and that has added our click here button right here. Now I can click on that button, and the two controls that I have access to on an instance by instance basis are text. So this is our first use, and this should take us to hash 12345. And then I might use that button down here. So let's go button component plus parameters, and I'll drag that down. And this one is going to say second use and be 54321. And then maybe we want another one, so let's duplicate it and come over here, and we'll type in third use. So you can see I have an instance by instance control over this. We'll call this 78910, and then we'll do one more instance of the button over here, and we'll call this fourth use, and we'll do 11, 12, 13, 14. And there we have it. So now you might be wondering why I just created a white button. Well, let's jump back into our design system. And this is where it takes some planning out. Which elements of your components should be globally controlled? And which elements of your components do you want to wire up to instance by instance parameters? In our case, we only wired up the call to action text and the link to instance by instance, which means now if I want to change the color of this button globally throughout my entire site, all I have to do is jump into the primary tab, click background, come in here and choose something like the purple. Let's go a little more purple than that, the purple here. Then we could come down and change our text color to something white, and we can save. And when I jump back to our home page here, you'll notice every instance of that button retains its parameter text and link, but has a new color from our global component. So we've looked at templates, which are completely disconnected. We've looked at components that are 100% controlled. And then we looked at components that include hybrid controls. And now this is great, but we're gonna work on creating something a little bit more complex and then take a look at how adding prefab as a setting on top of our component really helps speed things along. So we're gonna jump into our design system document here, and because we are going to turn these atoms, right, we're talking about atomic design here as well, because we are going to turn these atoms into something greater, let's create another design system document, and this time we'll call this our composed designs. And so these are going to be a little bit more complex and might use some of those atoms from our other component documents. So we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to do a 3 by rows and columns here. We're going to create something like our cards that we had on the home page. Now, because I want this to be reusable, I'm going to use a div inside of here. So let's actually grab our base div, and we'll call this one our card base. And then inside of that div, I'm going to actually add 2 more divs. I'm going to add one up top, which we'll call our aspect ratio for our image, and then I'm just going to duplicate that, and this one below here we'll call this content, where we'll have our headline. Now in the content, let's go ahead and just add a little bit of padding there so it doesn't look crazy when we add a headline in there. And then we'll grab our headline element, drag and drop that in. Obviously I'm not doing a whole lot of styling here, but we'll make this bold. Maybe it's 1.15 em, so it's a little larger. And then we'll enable our subheadline so we have 2 pieces of content there. And for the sake of being able to see our design here, let's go ahead and give our card base a white background. And I think that's looking pretty good. Now, if you saw my previous video on aspect ratios, you'll know what I'm doing here, but I'm simply going to come into this div. I'm going to set our padding on top to 56.25%. And then I'm going to grab another div and put that inside of there. This is going to be our image figure. So we'll type in image figure, and we'll open up our advanced image element. And there we have it. And then we'll scroll down and set our position to absolute 0. And now that's looking pretty good. Now we have a 16:9 image that will always fill the frame here. We have content below with a headline inside of that. Now we want to include our button in here. So we're actually going to grab this headline, add a little bit of margin below it here as separation. Let's do 2 ems below it there. And then just like we would on a page, we're going to grab our component, our button plus parameters, and drag that out. And now you can see how we're taking an atom, which was this button here from our first designs, right? We designed something granular like a button, and now we're pulling that into a molecule or a composed design here, where we now have atoms inside of things that will be future components. So now what we're going to do is add our parameters. And we're going to try to keep things pretty simple here, but let's make sure we select the card base as our element that we're creating. We'll open up our manage element, edit parameters, and now let's just add a few things in here. So we're going to do our curly brackets, and we know we want an image, so let's keep things simple. We'll just call this image, and then we want that to be label is image, and you'll notice on the left-hand side we now have parameters here, and we have our image field. Let's add a comma and specify that the type of field that this is an image field, and immediately you'll notice that took shape on the left-hand side there. We're not going to add anything else in. I think that's looking pretty good there. Now let's add some more parameters. We're going to add our headline in here, and we'll open that up, label that a headline, and then we'll add a comma, and we'll set this as field type is text. And then let's add another parameter, and we'll call this one our body. For body copy, we'll label this one body, and we'll say that this is type, and just to change things up a little bit, we'll say it's a text editor, and now you'll notice we can open that up and we get the rich text HTML or raw editor. And then this gets into our nested components. Let's actually add button text as another parameter. We'll open this up, we'll label this button, and we'll give it the field type of text. And then finally we want our button URL, and we'll open that one up, label it URL, and give it the type text as well. And that's looking pretty good. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, hey Josh, we already did that here on this component parameter. We have our CTA, which is our button text, and we have our link, which is our URL. But this is where we're getting into this atomic design a little bit further, where we're now going to control this from our card when we're using the card element. So how do we wire all of that up? Well, we need to remember our parameter names here. So image, headline, body, button text, and button URL. So now let's go into each of these. So here in our figure image, we're going to do DC, P for parameter, and this one was image, and double curlies. Now let's come down to our headline here, open up the content editor, and type in double curlies, DC, P, headline with a capital H. Now let's go down to our subheadline. We'll type in DC, P, body. And then let's click on this instance of our button component, and we'll come in here and we're going to type in DC, P, button text, double curlies, and then we'll come into our URL here and type in DC, P, button URL, double curly. Now at first glance it doesn't look like a whole lot is happening, but let's go ahead and click on our card base again here, open up our manage element, and export this as a component. We're not going to select anything else just yet, and let's save. Now we'll close this out and we'll jump back over to our home page here. Now in our home page, let's go ahead and add a new section right here below our hero section, and we'll make it a 3-column section. Now we want to add a card in here in column 1. So we're going to go to our elements, we're going to type in card, and here we have our card base. Let's drag it in, and there we have our card. Now obviously we need to get things started, so we can come into our image here, let's grab this coffee because that looks pretty good, and immediately it takes shape. Now we'll come into our headline and type first headline, come into our body and type some body copy, and then we could come into our button and type click me, and our URL 12345. And there you have it. You'll see how it came together, which is awesome. But if I then come in here and I type in card again and I drag that out here, I'm now starting from scratch again, which might be fine for something like the card. But there are other things where you might want to have a little bit of a baseline. For example, let's say we had border radius as one of our parameters that could be edited on a use-by-use basis, but you want to have something in there as a default before you get to other settings. That's where prefab comes into play. So let's jump back into our card design that we're working on here in this component, and let's set up a baseline. So let's go ahead and select our card base, and now we could come in here and we could select a baseline image that is always there just to kind of get things started. This is a headline, replace me. Come in here, this is body copy, replace me, click me, and button URL, replace dash me. And then underneath export component, we have prefab, so we're going to go ahead and click on that. We'll click save, and now when we jump out to our home page here, let's go ahead and get into our card design. You'll notice it didn't change this one. It didn't change this one because we did it in the parameters, which are an instance by instance basis. We're going to come in here and type in card base and drag that out here. Now it starts with all of these prefab things pre-populated in here. I can still change them on an instance by instance basis. So I could say this is card 3, and all of that is updated here, but not here and not here. And the next time I grab a card to use in an instance, for example here, let's grab card base, it'll simply use our original prefabbed elements for this new base, which I can then say this is card 2. So you'll notice those prefab elements just give us a nice starting point where we can then change things from there. Now, let's say we wanted to use our display controls or add a class or an ID to one of these cards here. Well, we can actually do that pretty easily. We can click on our card 1, come up to our manage element, and we can enable our customization tab, which now allows us for this one card to click on customize and add a class. This could be card class 1, and when I click on card 2, it does not have that. But if I needed it, I could enable it on card 2 as well, enable customization. Now I could come in here and say on tablet and mobile and small mobile, hide card 2, and now we are off to the races. Now to really showcase the power of components and this atomic design, let's go ahead and actually change up the images here just so you guys can kind of see this in action. So on the second one, I'm going to give that this coffee picture here, and then on our third one, I'm going to give that this coffee picture here. So you'll notice that each of our instances of this card has its own headline, has its own button text, has its own image. Now let's go ahead and save this and jump out to the front of the site where we have this listed out right here. Now let's say in the future we decided that these cards need to look a little bit different. we want the pictures, instead of being a 16:9 aspect ratio, we want them to be 4:3. Well, that's as simple as coming in here, clicking on our figure, going to our aspect ratio, and changing our percentage from 56.25 to 75%, which is 4:3. Now, with that one change, that's all I had to do right here to this component. I'm going to go ahead and save and jump back out to the front end of our site here and refresh, and notice that all of our pictures are now square or 4:3 aspect ratio. So throughout our entire site, anywhere we've used this card component has automatically been updated because we changed the core global component design. Now, as you'll recall, we're also using atomic design, so this is a component within our greater component. So let's say, for example, in the future, we decide that our buttons now need to be red and they need to be pill-shaped buttons. Well, instead of making that change here, because this is a component that simply contains our atom, we're going to jump into our design system where we control our buttons and say, oh, you know what? This is, 2 years from now, and we decide that the brand has changed, and so we're going to make this a red button, and that red button is going to have a border radius of 100 Ms, so it's a pill shape. I'm going to go ahead and just save this. That's it. That one button right here. I'm going to save that. And because I've used that as an atom in my various other components and have used those other components throughout my entire build, now when I come over to the front end of the site and I refresh, anywhere I've used that button has now been updated across the board. So you'll notice we have that button updated here where it was solo, but also updated here where it was nested inside of our greater molecule component. Now, I know this video covered a lot, but in a nutshell, you've learned about the differences between templates, which are fully disconnected, global components, which are 100% connected, hybrid components, which have parameters that are used on an instance-by-instance basis, and then hybrid components with prefab enabled, which also pulls through some baseline content for you. And now you can leverage these concepts in your future designs. As always, I hope you guys find these videos useful, and I will see you guys in the next video. Happy building!